Thunder cracked across the prairie like a whip, echoing through the night as Emma wiped flour from her hands. She glanced at the few pennies sitting on her kitchen table, her heart heavy with the weight of them. It was all she had until the harvest loan came through. The wind howled outside, rattling the small cabin she had barely been able to keep standing. It had been a hard year, no crops to speak of, and creditors knocking on her door with threats of taking what little she had left. She couldn't even remember the last time she'd felt safe or certain about anything. But the storm outside only seemed to be the beginning of her troubles. The pounding at the door made her jump. At first, she thought it was the wind, but the knock came again, louder this time. She hesitated. The last thing she needed was company, especially tonight, but something in the force of that knock told her it couldn't be ignored. When she opened the door, she didn't expect to see a man drenched to the bone, his mud-soaked Stetson pulled low over his face. He looked like he'd been through hell, and from the way his leather boots were ruined, Emma guessed he'd been walking for miles. But it was the little girl clutched against his side that caught her attention. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old, her face pale and her lips tinged with blue, shivering violently despite the thick layers of blankets wrapped around her. "Please, ma'am," the man said, his voice strained, almost desperate. "My horse went lame a mile back. My daughter's burning with fever. Just shelter us for a few hours until dawn." Emma's eyes flickered over him. His rough clothes, his expensive leather gear, his finely crafted saddle that didn't belong on this desolate stretch of land. The man wasn't just any traveler. The gold watch chain at his vest caught the light as he shifted, and Emma felt a surge of recognition. Rich man. He was no farmer or cowboy like the others who passed through these parts. She glanced back at the child, her condition more urgent than any class distinctions. "Come in," Emma whispered, stepping aside to let them enter, her own fears pushed aside for the moment in the face of a child suffering. The storm raged outside, but the storm within Emma's heart felt more palpable than ever. She had barely enough to survive, yet she was letting strangers into her home. She couldn't help but wonder how this moment would change everything. The man eased the girl onto the old wooden chair by the hearth and began to remove her boots and wet clothes, his hands shaking from cold or fear. Emma couldn't tell. The child's fever was undeniable, her body burning with heat that only seemed to make the room feel colder. Emma moved quickly, instinctively. She remembered the old remedies her mother had used, cold compresses, herbs, and old wise wisdom that had kept their small community alive for generations. Emma grabbed the last of her chamomile tea, boiled some water, and quickly mixed it into a paste. She used it to soothe the child's fevered skin, applying cool cloths to her forehead. The man watched, quiet at first, but his eyes softened as Emma's hands moved with practiced ease. There was something about her that seemed familiar to him, like a memory he couldn't quite place. The way she moved, the way she seemed to take control without hesitation. It was as if she were made for this. As the night went on, the child's cries quieted, and soon she slept. Emma breathed a sigh of relief, but the weight of the situation still hung heavy in the air. She couldn't help but notice the man's eyes as he looked at her, something between admiration and uncertainty. "She's strong," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved her." Emma nodded, but the truth was she wasn't sure how long she could keep this up. Her own body was starting to feel the strain of the night. There were still so many unknowns. Why was this man so desperate? Where had he come from? And what did he want from her, if anything? With the child resting, Emma finally had a moment to study the man more closely. His clothes, though muddy, were undeniably fine. A fine weave to his shirt, expensive wool in his coat. And yet, the exhaustion in his eyes, the weariness of his face, these told a different story. He had been traveling for a long time, perhaps longer than he cared to admit. His ruggedness, his silent strength, it was clear he was used to handling things on his own. But there was something about the way he looked at her, like he needed her help. As she moved about the cabin, gathering what little warmth she could for the two of them, she felt the tension in the air. Emma wasn't one for small talk, but she couldn't help but wonder about this stranger and his child. "You're a long way from home," she ventured, her voice soft as she placed the cold compresses back into the basin of water. He chuckled, a hollow sound that didn't quite reach his eyes. "A man's home is wherever he can make it," he said, almost as though the words didn't matter. "I've been looking for a place for a long time now." "Alone?" Emma asked before she could stop herself, the question hanging awkwardly between them. She quickly regretted it. She didn't want to pry into his life. She had enough of her own troubles. But he answered anyway, his voice distant. "A long time," he said, and for a moment, Emma thought he might say more. Instead, he fell silent, staring into the fire. The night dragged on in silence, save for the crackling of the fire and the occasional rustle of sheets as Sophie shifted in her sleep. Emma kept watch over the little girl, but her mind was spinning. Who was this man? What was he running from? And why had he ended up here, in the middle of nowhere, with nothing but a sick child and a desperation that seemed too much for even a man like him to bear? It wasn't until the small hours of the morning that Sophie's fever finally broke, her breathing steadying. Emma let herself relax, finally able to rest her aching body. She sank into the chair by the fire, too tired to keep her eyes open. But just before she drifted off to sleep, she noticed the man stand and move to the far corner of the cabin. He moved with quiet deliberation, his boots creaking against the wooden floor as he examined the cabin with the faintest of glances. The lantern light flickered softly, casting long shadows against the walls. His eyes landed on the small table in the corner, and Emma saw him pause. His face hardened as he picked up the eviction notice that had been sitting on her table. He turned it over slowly, reading the words as though they were a personal message to him. Emma's heart skipped in her chest, but she said nothing. There was nothing to say. Then, to her surprise, he found the marriage certificate, her secret that no one knew, the one that had made her an outcast, a widow to a Chinese railroad worker. In the harsh world of Montana in the 1880s, that made her an enemy in the eyes of most. He looked up at her, his face unreadable. His next words were quiet, almost soft, as he placed the certificate back on the table. "You've had a harder life than most," he murmured, "and you're still here." Emma didn't answer, but her pulse raced. She wasn't sure if she could trust him, if she even should. But one thing was certain. By sunrise, everything was about to change. And as the first rays of light broke over the horizon, Emma's life would never be the same again. The sound of heavy footsteps outside broke the silence of the cabin just as dawn began to creep through the cracks in the walls. Emma stirred, her pulse quickening as she heard the sharp, demanding knock on the door. The tension in the air thickened, and Cole's face turned ashen when he heard the voices outside, gruff, low, and unmistakably threatening. A sudden jolt of panic surged through Emma as she realized something was terribly wrong. Without warning, the door burst open, revealing 3 rugged men, their eyes hard, their faces rough with years of lawlessness. The leader, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward with a sneer. Mrs. Vanessa Brennan posted a reward for the return of her daughter. $500 for her safe return. Emma's stomach twisted as she realized the situation was far worse than she imagined. These men weren't here by accident. They were hired guns, and they had come for Sophie. Cole stood protectively in front of her, his eyes hardening as he faced the intruders. "I have custody papers," he said, his voice steady, but with an edge of desperation. "Judge's order. She's my daughter." The man, Garrett, laughed coldly, eyeing Emma and then looking back at Cole. "Your judge's order ain't worth the paper it's printed on." That judge in her pocket changed his mind. "New warrants out for your arrest." The realization hit Emma like a wave. Vanessa wasn't just chasing after Sophie. She was using the law to take her, to tear Cole's family apart. The bounty hunters didn't seem to care for the truth. They were here for one thing: money. But Emma wasn't ready to give up Sophie without a fight. The girl, still feverish and weak, woke up at the commotion, and when she looked up, her eyes went straight to Emma. "Don't let them take me to Mama," Sophie cried, her tiny hands reaching out to Emma, not to the man she thought was her father. The sight of it was enough to send a chill through the room. Garrett sneered. "Seems the kid's a bit too attached to you, ma'am. Maybe you're in on this." Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she felt the weight of the situation sink in. If she didn't act quickly, they'd lose Sophie to a mother who didn't care for her well-being, only her wealth. "You can't take her like this," Emma said, her voice firm as she looked at Garrett. "She's too ill to travel. Moving her could make her worse." Her bluff was a gamble, but it was the only card she had. Garrett hesitated, looking at Sophie with a mix of doubt and greed. "One more day," Emma insisted, her tone sharp. "Then I'll certify her health, but not a minute before. Take her now, and you'll be carrying a dead child back to her mother." Garrett considered this, his eyes narrowing, but after a moment, he nodded reluctantly. "Fine, you have one more day." He motioned for his men to take position outside, and the cabin fell into an uneasy silence once more. As the men settled in for their watch, Emma felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She had bought them a little more time, but the clock was ticking, and she wasn't sure how much longer they could keep running. Cole sat down beside her, his face grim. "Why would you risk everything for us?" he asked, his voice low and full of disbelief. Emma looked at him, seeing the strain in his eyes, the fear for his daughter, and the vulnerability he'd tried to hide. "I couldn't let her be taken," she said simply, her voice steady despite the fear churning inside her. "She's just a child." Cole nodded slowly, his gaze shifting to Sophie, who was curled up on the cot, her breathing finally steadying. He didn't say anything, but the unspoken words hung in the air between them. They were both trapped now, their fates tied to a little girl who had no idea the world was about to turn upside down. As the sun rose higher in the sky, Emma's mind raced, wondering what would happen next. She hadn't expected to find herself here, helping a stranger caught in the middle of a custody battle that seemed more like a war than a legal dispute. And yet, here they were, bound by the desperate need to protect Sophie from a mother who saw her as nothing more than a pawn in a game of money and power. Cole, too, seemed lost in thought, his brow furrowed in concentration. "There's a ranch 2 days' ride north," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. "It's mine. If we can get there, I have lawyers who can help. They'll fight this in court." Emma looked at him, torn. "And what if we don't make it?" she asked. "Those men will come after us." Cole's eyes hardened. "Then we fight," he said simply, "but I'll get her away from this. I promise you that." It was the first time Emma had heard Cole speak with such certainty, and it gave her a glimmer of hope. But even as he spoke, Emma knew that the road ahead would be treacherous. The bounty hunters weren't going to stop, and neither was Vanessa. As they prepared for their next move, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that their world was on the brink of collapsing. But there was no going back now. She had made her choice. And as she looked at Sophie, sleeping peacefully despite the chaos swirling around them, Emma knew there was no other choice but to fight. They would make it, or they wouldn't. But she would do whatever it took to protect that little girl. The morning air was crisp as they prepared to leave, their escape plan carefully plotted, and their nerves on edge. Emma, Cole, and Sophie had to move quickly, their lives hanging by a thread as they left the safety of the cabin. Cole made sure Sophie was bundled tightly, holding her close as they mounted their horses. Emma rode on her mare, while Cole, despite his exhaustion, kept his focus sharp. The guards outside barely noticed as Emma stepped out to fetch water from the creek, her movement casual enough to not draw suspicion. But as soon as she turned back toward the cabin, Cole and Sophie made their move. Their horses were ready, and the chase was about to begin. The moment they hit the open prairie, Emma heard shouts and the pounding of hooves behind them. Cole's knowledge of the land came into play immediately as they veered off the main trail and cut across the rocky terrain, with the bounty hunters in hot pursuit. The sound of gunfire made Emma's heart race, the sharp crack of the shots reverberating through the trees. She had never been shot at before, and the fear that gripped her was unlike anything she had ever felt. Sophie, clinging to Cole, began to whimper, terrified by the sounds of violence and the danger surrounding them. "It's going to be all right, baby," Cole whispered to her, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the landscape, searching for the next turn. Emma could hardly breathe, but she focused on staying ahead of the pursuing men. As the chase continued, they splashed across a creek, water rising up to their knees, and galloped deeper into the dense forest. Emma's heart raced as they dodged rocks and fallen trees, trying to keep ahead of the bounty hunters. She could hear the pounding hooves of the men behind them, but Cole pushed them forward, determined to keep his daughter safe. The chase seemed endless, and Emma's body ached with the strain of the ride, but there was no time to rest. Cole's horse, though stronger, was growing tired, and Emma's old mare was already struggling to keep up. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, they finally reached the rocky canyon Cole had spoken about. The terrain was treacherous, but worked in their favor. The bounty hunters, less familiar with the area, hesitated. Cole led them through narrow paths, expertly navigating the rough landscape, until the sound of pursuit faded away. The horses, exhausted, stumbled to a halt, and they took shelter in a small cave hidden in the rocks. Emma dismounted, her legs shaking, and looked around them, her thoughts racing. They had made it out of the immediate danger, but the worst was far from over. As Cole checked the horses and secured their camp for the night, Emma sank to the ground beside Sophie, who had fallen asleep, her head resting against Cole's chest. Emma looked at them both, her heart swelling with a strange sense of attachment. The bond between them had grown in such a short time, but it felt like they had been together forever. As Cole sat beside her, a silence fell between them, thick with the weight of their shared experience. The crackling of the fire was the only sound, and Emma couldn't help but watch him as he stared into the flames, his expression unreadable. She had learned more about him in the last few hours than she had in the past 2 days. He was a man with a past, a man running from a life that had tried to tear him apart. He was strong, yet there was something broken about him, a vulnerability he didn't let anyone see. They sat in silence for a long time, the tension of the past few days finally catching up with Emma. She had expected to feel relief now that they were out of immediate danger, but instead, she felt something else, something she couldn't quite name. Cole finally broke the silence. "We'll make it. You'll see," he said, his voice low but full of conviction. Emma nodded, though her mind raced. She wasn't sure if they would make it. Vanessa wasn't the only threat they faced. There were the bounty hunters, the law, and the world that wanted to tear them apart. But in this moment, in this cave with the fire crackling between them, Emma allowed herself a small spark of hope. For Sophie, for herself, for the family they were trying to build, no matter how impossible it seemed. The night was long, the dangers far from over, but Emma knew they had to keep going. There was no turning back now. They had crossed the point of no return, and now the only thing that mattered was survival. The night had barely settled when they resumed their journey, only to be met with a chilling silence, broken by the ominous rustle of leaves in the wind. As they made their way through the dense trees, they found themselves cornered, not by the bounty hunters, but by something far more dangerous. From the shadows, a well-dressed woman stepped forward, her piercing gaze locking on Cole, her lips curling into a smile that sent a shiver down Emma's spine. It was Vanessa, Cole's estranged wife, and she was not alone. Behind her stood several hired guns, their hands resting on the butts of their rifles. "Cole, darling, did you really think you'd escape with my daughter?" Vanessa's voice was laced with contempt, and she took slow, deliberate steps toward them, eyes flicking disdainfully to Emma. And you brought a friend, she sneered, her gaze lingering on Emma, as if she were nothing more than a stain to be wiped away. How sentimental. Cole's body stiffened, his face pale with a mix of anger and disbelief. You're wasting your time, Vanessa. Sophie's not going anywhere with you, he said, his voice low but firm. Vanessa tilted her head, her smile widening. Oh, I think you'll find that Sophie is already mine. You see, I'm not just taking her for myself, Cole. I'm taking everything. Your fortune, your ranch, and now your child. The venom in her words was unmistakable. Emma stood frozen, her heart racing as she tried to process the situation. The woman in front of her, despite her elegant appearance, was a ruthless manipulator who had orchestrated a scheme to destroy Cole. It wasn't just Sophie she wanted, it was everything Cole had built. As the tension in the air thickened, Cole's hand instinctively moved to shield Sophie, who was clutching his side, eyes wide with fear. You would go that far? Cole's voice cracked with the weight of betrayal. Destroy your own daughter's father just to take everything I've worked for? Vanessa's eyes flashed with coldness. Everything is mine, Cole. It always was. And now that you're a wanted man, I'll make sure I get it all. Your land, your cattle, your fortune. You won't be able to protect yourself or Sophie. Emma felt a cold wave of realization sweep over her. This wasn't just a custody battle. It was a power play, one that had cost Cole everything. And Vanessa wasn't done. She would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. You think you could just walk away with Sophie and live happily ever after? Vanessa continued, her tone mocking. I'll make sure you both disappear into nothingness. You'll never be able to fight back. Just as Vanessa was about to give the order to her men, there was a sudden interruption, shouting from the distance, followed by the heavy hooves of approaching horses. Emma's heart skipped a beat, and she looked around in confusion. From the trees emerged Sheriff Morrison and his deputies, and to Emma's surprise, Garrett, the bounty hunter, was shackled and led by the sheriff himself. The sheriff's voice rang out with authority. Mrs. Brennan, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, he said, his voice steady. Vanessa's face turned ashen as the sheriff handed over a bundle of papers. Judge Hartwell isn't dead, Vanessa. He woke up yesterday and told the truth. Garrett here confessed he was paid to attack the judge, paid by you. You hired him to make it look like Cole killed the judge. And now, thanks to him, we have enough evidence to prove it. Vanessa's eyes widened in horror as the sheriff's words sunk in. Her entire plot was crumbling. Garrett, the man she had hired to carry out the scheme, had turned on her, offering a full confession in exchange for a lighter sentence. You can't do this, Vanessa sputtered, her voice full of panic. But it was too late. Garrett's confession had sealed her fate. The sheriff looked at her with cold contempt. It's over, Vanessa. You'll be facing charges for conspiracy, bribery, and attempted murder. As the reality of her defeat settled in, Vanessa's posture faltered. But she wasn't done yet. You think you have me? She hissed. Garrett's word means nothing. He's a criminal, and all of this is a lie. You'll never be able to prove I ordered any of it. Just as Vanessa prepared to make one final stand, a new voice cut through the air, one that brought with it the final nail in her coffin. Mrs. Patterson, the housekeeper from Cole's ranch, stepped forward, her expression stern and unwavering. I saw her, Sheriff, Mrs. Patterson said firmly. I saw Mrs. Brennan leave the judge's house that night. I heard her telling Garrett to make sure the judge couldn't testify. The shock on Vanessa's face was unmistakable. You're lying, she screamed. I never said any such thing. But Mrs. Patterson's words rang true, and as the sheriff moved to arrest Vanessa, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. The truth was out. Vanessa had orchestrated the entire scheme, manipulating the legal system and paying off anyone who could help her take control of Cole's life. But in the end, it was her own greed that had led to her undoing. As Vanessa was hauled away, struggling and screaming, Emma looked at Cole, her heart still pounding in her chest. The danger wasn't over, but they had won. For now. However, just as Emma allowed herself a moment of relief, the sound of a gunshot echoed from the distance. She froze, her blood running cold. It wasn't over yet. The final threat still loomed large, and Vanessa was about to show them just how far she would go to destroy everything. The days following Vanessa's arrest were filled with uncertainty, but they also marked a strange sense of calm for Emma and Cole. It was as though the storm had passed, leaving them with the remnants of shattered world, but they were still standing. Emma had been staying at Cole's ranch for several days now, recovering from her bullet wound, though the physical pain was far less than the emotional weight she carried. Every morning, she awoke to the strange sensation of softness, soft sheets, soft blankets, and the warmth of a home that didn't feel like it belonged to her. She had been a widow for so long, living in the cold isolation of her cabin, fighting for survival, that it was hard to get used to the luxury that surrounded her now. Cole had hired the best doctor to care for her, and Sophie, ever the bright light, visited her constantly, bringing her drawings and fresh flowers from the garden. Emma smiled weakly at the child's small efforts, her heart warmed by Sophie's innocence and the quiet bond that had formed between them. Sophie's laughter was like a balm for her wounds, reminding Emma of why she had chosen to fight for this little girl. Yet, despite the comfort of the ranch and the security of Cole's presence, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong here. This life, this world of wealth and privilege, felt so foreign to her, so far removed from the dusty cabin where she had once lived with her late husband. She couldn't forget who she was, where she came from, or the stigma that had followed her since the day she married Thomas. Her Chinese heritage made her an outcast, and it was something she could never escape, no matter how much Cole tried to make her feel welcome. One evening, as she sat by the fire, her mind wandered to the conversation she had had with Cole just days before. He had been kind, patient, and understanding, but there was an edge of uncertainty in his eyes that she couldn't ignore. She had offered him nothing but her brokenness and her skills as a healer. What did he see in her? Why had he brought her here to this lavish ranch when he could have had anyone? She didn't have the answer, but what she did know was that the more time she spent with him, the more complicated everything became. Cole, too, seemed conflicted. He had seen something in her that he hadn't seen in a long time, someone who was willing to fight for what was right, even when it seemed impossible. She had risked everything for Sophie, and that was something Cole respected deeply. But as the days passed, he realized something else. He had begun to care for Emma in a way that went beyond gratitude. She wasn't just the woman who had saved his daughter. She was someone who had brought warmth and light into a world that had been dark and lonely for far too long. Yet, he couldn't ignore the differences between them, their worlds, their backgrounds, their social standings. He was a wealthy cattle baron, and she was a widow who had lost everything, a woman without a name or a place in this society. Still, the more they talked, the more they shared their stories, the more Cole realized that these differences didn't matter as much as he had once thought. It was the bond they had formed over the past few days, the shared experiences, the trust that had built between them, that made him question everything he had ever believed about love, about family, and about what truly mattered. One afternoon, after Sophie had gone to her lessons with one of the ranch hands, Cole found Emma sitting by the window, her gaze lost in the horizon. He approached her slowly, hesitant to interrupt the quiet moment, but something inside him told him he couldn't wait any longer. "Emma," he said softly, his voice breaking the stillness of the room. She turned to him, her expression unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something he couldn't quite place. "How are you feeling?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "I'm better," she said quietly. "The pain's not as bad anymore." Cole nodded, but he could tell there was more weighing on her than just the physical wound. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable," he said after a long pause. "Bringing you here into all this, it's not easy, is it?" Emma shook her head, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. It's just, she hesitated, unsure how to put her thoughts into words. I've never had anything like this. This a life. It's all so unfamiliar to me. Cole stepped closer, his gaze softening as he saw the vulnerability in her eyes. I understand, he said gently. This life is nothing like what you've known, but I don't want you to feel out of place. You've done more for Sophie than anyone ever could. You're part of this family now, whether you feel like you belong or not. Emma's chest tightened at his words. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that she could have a place in this world, but there were too many things holding her back. I don't belong here, Cole, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm a widow, a woman of no name, no wealth. This world will destroy me. It always has. Cole's heart ached as he looked at her, seeing the fear in her eyes. It's not your past that defines you, Emma, he said firmly. It's what you do with the present, with what you have right now. And what you've done is more than anyone could ever ask for. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken words. Cole took a step closer, his hand reaching out to gently touch Emma's arm. You've shown me what love really means. What it means to protect someone, to fight for them, to sacrifice everything for them. You've made me realize that nothing in this world matters more than family. Emma looked up at him, her breath catching in her throat. Cole, I don't know if I can ever repay you for what you've done for me. For Sophie. Cole smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. You don't have to repay me. All I ask is that you stay. Not because of gratitude, but because you want to be here. Because you want to be part of this family. Emma's heart swelled at his words, but a small voice inside her warned her that this was too complicated, too dangerous. I can't promise that, she whispered. I can't promise you anything. Cole nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. I don't expect promises, Emma. All I want is a chance to show you that you do belong here, that this, he gestured to the ranch, to the land, to the family they were building, could be your home if you wanted it to be. Emma looked down at her hands, her heart torn between the love she was beginning to feel for Cole and the fear that had gripped her for so long. She had lived a lifetime of loss and fear, of fighting for survival. But here, in this strange, foreign world, she had found something she never thought she'd have again. Hope. I can't stay here forever, she said quietly, almost to herself. I can't belong to a world I don't understand. Cole moved closer, his voice soft but firm. You don't have to stay forever. Just stay for now. Stay as Sophie's governess, as part of this family. Let me show you that there's more to life than what you've known. Emma met his gaze, and for the first time in a long while, she felt something stirring within her. Could she really let go of the past and accept this new life? Could she allow herself to belong to something greater than her fear? Sophie's laughter echoed from outside, and Emma couldn't help but smile. This child, this girl she had fought so hard to protect, was the reason she had come this far. And maybe, just maybe, she could learn to build a new life for them, together. As the evening light faded, Cole stepped back, giving her space to think. Take your time, Emma. I'm not asking you to decide anything today. Just know that you're not alone anymore. Whatever you decide, we'll face it together. Emma nodded, the weight of his words settling deep in her heart. She had come to this ranch as a stranger, but now, for the first time, she could see the possibility of something more. She could see the future, not as a widow, not as an outcast, but as part of a family that had been torn apart but was beginning to heal, one small step at a time. And as she sat by the fire that night, with Sophie asleep in her arms and Cole nearby, Emma finally allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could find a place for herself in this new world. The rain was relentless, hammering against the roof of the cabin as Emma lay in bed, her mind racing with the gravity of everything that had unfolded over the past few days. Cole, Sophie, and she were still reeling from the threat that had loomed over them. Vanessa's escape, the contract out on her life, and the knowledge that their enemies were far from done. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she thought about what had happened and what was yet to come. Cole had told her that they'd face it together, but she had seen the fear in his eyes. They were out of time. Their enemies were closing in. The situation had grown so dire that there was nowhere left to run. She could feel the weight of it pressing down on her, the walls closing in. She had spent most of her life surviving, fighting to stay alive, and now, as strange as it felt to admit it, she wasn't sure if she could fight anymore. She wanted to stay in this strange, new life that Cole had given her, a life that wasn't full of threats, danger, and fear. She wanted to build something with him, something lasting. But her past had a way of following her. And now, with the storm outside raging and the sense of danger thicker than ever, Emma knew that it wasn't just her past that she had to fight. It was everything she held dear. She couldn't risk losing Sophie or Cole or the future she was starting to dare dream of. But the assassins were out there, still hunting them, still trying to destroy everything. As she lay there, her mind filled with thoughts of what had happened, of how far she had come since that first night when she had opened the door to Cole and Sophie, she knew that her life had changed forever. They couldn't go back to the way things had been. There was no more running. She had to make a stand. And she wasn't about to let the same fear that had haunted her for so long control her anymore. She could feel the resolve settling in her chest, a fire she hadn't felt in years. She would protect Sophie, protect Cole, and protect the family they had started. Emma's heart steadied as she stood, determination flooding through her. She wasn't going to let fear win. Not now, not ever. She wasn't going to let Vanessa take this away from her. The storm outside had nothing on the storm inside her. As she gathered her things, pulling on the sturdy coat that Cole had given her, her mind was already working, already planning. She wasn't going to run from this. She had come too far, and no matter what it cost, she would see this through. When she stepped out into the rain, Cole was waiting for her. His face was grim, his eyes shadowed with the weight of everything that had happened. "You're not going anywhere," he said, his voice low, but the strength in it left no room for argument. "I'm not letting you face this alone." Emma shook her head, her jaw set. "I'm not alone. Not anymore. We face this together, Cole. We face it as a family." The words were out before she could stop them, and as she said them, they rang with the truth of them. Cole stepped forward, his hand on her shoulder. His eyes searched hers, full of emotion. "You don't have to do this. You've already risked everything for us." She smiled faintly, but there was a fierce glint in her eyes. "I didn't come this far just to turn away now. We're in this together, and I'm not running anymore." For a moment, they stood there, rain soaking their clothes, the world around them a blur. Sophie's laughter echoed from inside the cabin, a reminder of what they were fighting for. Cole nodded, his expression softening as he looked at Emma. "Then let's make sure we're ready," he said quietly. And so they prepared. Together, they gathered what weapons they could find, Cole's rifle, a few pistols, a handful of ammunition. They fortified the cabin, making sure every window was secure and every door locked. Emma's mind was sharp as she worked beside Cole, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Sophie. The child who had come into her life so unexpectedly, so desperately, and who had now become the reason for everything. She had promised to protect her, to make sure Sophie had the chance at a future, and Emma wasn't going to fail her. As they worked, Emma's heart pounded with a mixture of dread and hope. The dread of what was coming, the knowledge that this could all end in violence, in bloodshed and loss. But the hope that this was it, the moment that would define everything. They were going to survive. They had to. When the final preparations were complete, they sat in the dim light of the cabin, waiting. The storm outside still raged, but Emma knew this storm was different. This one wasn't just nature. It was the battle for their lives. As the hours stretched on, their nerves were stretched thin. But Emma could feel it, the quiet determination that had settled in her chest. They weren't just waiting for the threat to come to them. They were waiting for the right moment to strike back. The first sign came in the dead of night, when a shadow moved across the window. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she signaled to Cole. They moved silently, positioning themselves by the door. A few moments later, the door slammed open, and 3 men burst in, rifles raised. The fight was on. Emma's heart pounded as she dove to the side, grabbing the rifle Cole had left for her. She fired, her hands steady despite the chaos around her. The men reacted quickly, but they were no match for the determination in Emma's eyes. The first man fell, a bullet through his chest. The second staggered, injured but not dead. But the third was a blur, moving too fast, firing off shots that missed by inches. Emma's pulse raced as she ducked behind the table, her breath quickening. Cole was firing, too, and Sophie was safe, hidden in the corner as promised. The cabin shook with the sound of gunfire, the roar of violence echoing in Emma's ears. She could hear the men shouting, their movements erratic as they tried to surround her. But Emma wasn't backing down. She took aim, her finger tightening on the trigger, and fired. The second man went down, his rifle clattering to the floor. Only one remained, but he was injured, struggling to keep his balance. He aimed for Sophie, and in that moment, Emma felt the world slow down. She moved faster than she'd ever moved in her life and took the final shot. The man dropped, lifeless, his weapon falling to the ground with a thud. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of Emma's heavy breathing. Her body was trembling, but there was a sense of finality in the air. They had done it. They had survived. Emma lowered her rifle, her hands shaking with the aftermath of the battle. She looked over at Cole, whose face was a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Sophie, too, was safe, her wide eyes filled with fear, but also a glimmer of something else. Something Emma recognized as hope. Emma moved to her side, her heart swelling with pride. "You're safe," she whispered, hugging Sophie tightly. "We're all safe." It wasn't until they heard the distant sound of more hooves approaching that Emma realized the battle was far from over. They had won this fight, but there were more battles ahead. Vanessa wouldn't stop, but Emma had never been one to back down from a fight. She had come this far, and she would keep going. Together, with Cole and Sophie by her side, she would face whatever came next. Because this was her family now. This was where she belonged. And no one, not even Vanessa, could take that away. As the rain poured down outside, Emma made a vow to herself and to the family she had come to love. No matter what happened, she would protect them. She would stand her ground, no matter how hard the fight. Because this time, she wasn't running. She was going to fight for her family, and no one could take them from her. The storm might still be raging, but it was nothing compared to the storm that was coming for them. But Emma was ready. She was ready to face whatever came next. Together. Forever.